In Texas, the state with the highest number of executions in the United States, over 570 death row inmates have been executed since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. It's a haunting number, serving as a testament to the harshness of the justice system here. Each of these individuals has a unique story, yet they all share one common thread: their last meal and their final words. Have you ever wondered, what would they choose to eat in their final moments? Or, could their last words change the way we see justice and punishment? Let's explore these truly shocking and emotional stories of death row inmates executed in Texas. 1. Odell Barnes Jr., Texas, Wichita Falls, winter of 1989. In the quiet home of Helen Bass, a woman was brutally beaten, raped, and then murdered. When neighbors discovered the scene, it haunted the entire neighborhood for years to come. Odell Barnes Jr. was arrested soon after. The evidence against him was overwhelming, from fingerprints on a night lamp, semen at the crime scene, to bloodstains from Helen Bass on his clothes. But this is where the story begins to take a twist. In the years that followed, Barnes maintained his innocence. Human rights activists, lawyers, and even a portion of the public began to question the accuracy of the verdict. Mistakes in evidence collection, hasty prosecution, all became the spark for calls for clemency. Yet, the sentence remained unchanged. On March 1, 2000, Odell Barnes Jr. was executed by lethal injection. His final meal? He chose nothing. No fancy dishes. Barnes simply said he wanted justice, equality, world peace. Simple words, yet their weight carried far beyond the walls of the Walls Unit prison. As the final moment arrived, Barnes looked directly at those witnessing the execution and said, "I want to send my deepest love to my family, my supporters, and my lawyers. They've always been there for me. I thank them for proving my innocence, even though the court never acknowledged it. My life hasn't been easy, but after meeting those who believed in me, I know everything will come to an end. I hope this marks the beginning of better judgments in the future. That's all I want to say." No one knows the full truth. But those words, in a cold room, under the gaze of so many eyes, still echo. They weren't an admission. They weren't a denial. They were simply the words of a man, facing the moment history had decided for him. 2. Lawrence Russell Brewer, Texas. One night in June of 1998, the small, peaceful town of Jasper, Texas, was dragged back to one of the darkest periods in American history. This wasn't just a murder. It was a living symbol of racial hatred, a brutal act with no mercy. Lawrence Russell Brewer, along with his two accomplices, John William King and Sean Berry, chose James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old African-American man, as their victim, committing one of the most gruesome crimes Texas had seen in decades. They didn't kill Byrd with a gun. They beat him, then chained him to the back of a pickup truck with a metal chain. They drove down an asphalt road for over 3 miles. His body was dragged, torn apart when it hit a concrete culvert along the roadside. Brewer was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. While the nation was in shock over the brutality of the crime, Brewer showed no remorse. In multiple interviews, he claimed he felt no regret, stating he was just doing what he believed was right. On the day of his execution, September 21, 2011, Brewer entered the lethal injection chamber. Before that, he requested a feast, as if it were a grand last meal: 2 pieces of fried chicken with gravy and onions, a bacon cheeseburger, scrambled eggs with ground beef and jalapenos, fried okra, 1 pound of buffalo wings, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, Blue Bell vanilla ice cream, a peanut butter fudge, and 3 root beer bottles. But when the food tray was brought to him, Brewer quietly declined. He simply said, "I'm not hungry." This action stunned the prison guards and led the Texas authorities to make a historic decision. They permanently revoked the privilege of choosing a last meal for all death row inmates in the state. When asked if he had any final words, Brewer just shook his head. "No, I don't have a final statement." No apology. No justification. Not a hint of remorse. His death didn't close the pain in Jasper. And in the history of modern executions, Brewer will forever be remembered as a symbol of extremism, not just in his actions, but in his silence. 3. Charles Brooks Jr., Texas. On December 14, 1976, in Fort Worth, Texas, a man named David Gregory walked into a garage to fix a customer's car. Just a few minutes later, he was tied up with a coat hanger, his mouth taped shut, and then shot directly in the head. His body was found kneeling, as if an unspoken plea had never been made. Charles Brooks Jr., along with Woody Loudriz, was accused of carrying out the kidnapping and murder. Both denied pulling the trigger. But the court didn't need that. Brooks was sentenced to death in April of 1978, marking his name in U.S. judicial history as the first person to be executed by lethal injection. On December 7, 1982, Charles Brooks was led to the execution chamber. When asked about his last meal, he initially requested fried shrimp and oysters, perhaps recalling a childhood memory or a distant home. But the prison refused. Shellfish weren't on the approved list. In the end, he had a simple meal: a T-bone steak, French fries, ketchup, biscuits, peach pie, and a glass of iced tea. But what's most memorable wasn't the food, but his final words. Charles Brooks didn't cry. He didn't avoid the moment. He lifted his head high and recited the Islamic faith's declaration of belief. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Indeed, we belong to Allah and surely we will return to him. He looked toward his family and said, I love you. As the needle began to administer the drug, he tried to speak one last time. Allahu Akbar. Allah is the greatest. Brooks passed away peacefully, as if death was something he had prepared for his entire life. No one knows for sure what happens after we close our eyes. But if there is a place for forgiveness, perhaps, Brooks found his way there with his final faith. 4. Ruben Cantu, Texas. On the night of November 8, 1984, in the Southside neighborhood of San Antonio, Texas, two teenagers snuck through the fence of a construction site. Ruben Cantu, aged 17, and David Garza, aged 15, carried a gun and an unclear intention: to rob or to prove something to the world. Inside the unfinished house, two workers were sleeping after a long day. They had nothing of value except their sleep, and after that, one would never wake up. Pedro Gomez was shot dead. Juan Moreno, who survived, carried 2 bullets and a memory that would never fade. It was Moreno's testimony that later became the foundation for Ruben Cantu's death sentence. But time didn't just pass, it exposed cracks. Years after the sentence was carried out, Juan Moreno, the living witness, reversed his original testimony. He said he had been coerced, pressured, and was uncertain that Ruben Cantu was the one who fired the shots. Journalists, lawyers, and even former judges involved in the case began to express doubts about the fairness of the trial. But it was too late. On August 24, 1993, Ruben Cantu, 17 at the time of the crime, 26 at the time of his execution, was injected with lethal drugs at Huntsville Prison, Texas. Before his death, he requested a simple meal: fried chicken and rice. Nothing extravagant, nothing complicated, just like the simplicity of his youth. When asked for his final words, Cantu didn't shy away. He looked straight ahead and said, I am an innocent man, and something very wrong is taking place tonight. Those words didn't save him, but they didn't fall silent either. They continue to echo in debates about justice, about adolescence, and about the irreversible mistakes of the death penalty system. 5. Richard Cartwright, Texas. One night in August of 1996, in Corpus Christi, where the sea breeze usually brings a sense of peace, a meeting that was supposed to be consensual turned into a deadly trap. Richard Cartwright, along with 2 others, Dennis Haygood and Kelly Overstreet, planned to rob Nick Morida, a 37-year-old man. They lured him to a secluded park, where only dim streetlights and the sound of wind through dry branches filled the air. When Morida arrived, Cartwright drew a gun, Overstreet held a knife to his neck, and everything happened in seconds. The victim tried to run, but a bullet in his back and a stab wound ended his life. Death came quickly, but the consequences lasted for decades. Haygood and Overstreet chose to testify against Cartwright in exchange for lighter sentences. Cartwright was sentenced to death. Years later, public opinion began to question, who was the real shooter? Was it Cartwright, or was he just the last one left to take the blame? On May 19, 2005, Cartwright entered the execution chamber. His last meal, surrounded by concrete walls and barbed wire, was almost a feast. Fried chicken, a cheese sandwich, fried onions, French fries, bacon, sausage, cheesecake, and a cinnamon roll. A meal that was both a symphony of flavors and a farewell to life's simplest joys. Before leaving the world, Cartwright spoke slowly. "I want to apologize to the victim's family for any pain and suffering I have caused. I love my family and friends, and I thank them for their support." A late apology, one that couldn't bring the victim back, but was enough to remind us, though guilt is real, the person behind the crime can still express regret. 6. Eliseo Cuevas, Texas. On July 24, 1974, within the solid walls of the Huntsville prison in Texas, a tense 11-day riot erupted. Eliseo Cuevas, along with 2 other inmates, Fred Carrasco and Rodolfo Dominguez, plotted an audacious escape, taking 11 staff members and 4 fellow prisoners hostage. The standoff between them and the authorities lasted almost 2 weeks, with dozens of negotiations and escalating tension every hour. When the escape attempt occurred on August 3rd, the plan failed. 2 female hostages, Yvonne Basita and Julia Standley, lost their lives. Cuevas' 2 accomplices died in the chaos. Cuevas was the only one who survived. He was tried and sentenced to death for his direct involvement in the death of Julia Standley, a dedicated prison staff member. The case shocked both the prison system and the public, highlighting the risks involved in managing prison security. On May 23, 1991, Eliseo Cuevas was executed at the very place the riot had taken place. His last meal was a traditional Southern dish: fried chicken and dumplings, steamed rice, sliced bread, black beans, and iced tea, simple, yet filled with deep meaning. Before he left, Cuevas said briefly, "I'm going to a beautiful place." "All right, Warden, let's begin." No resentment. No defense. Just a man at peace with his final moment. 7. Humberto Leal Garcia, Texas. San Antonio, May of 1994. A teenage party ended with the disappearance of Adria Sauceda, a 16-year-old girl. She was taken by Humberto Leal Garcia, someone she knew. But Adria never returned. Her body was found in a tragic state at a remote location. The police began an investigation, and Leal quickly became the prime suspect. Forensic evidence supported the accusations. Leal was arrested and sentenced to death. However, the case sparked international controversy when Leal, a Mexican citizen, was not informed of his right to consular access as outlined by the Vienna Convention. The Mexican government, several human rights organizations, and even the International Court of Justice voiced their opposition to the execution. Despite this, the Texas court upheld the verdict. On July 7, 2011, Humberto Leal Garcia was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville. Before his execution, he requested a meal that reflected his homeland: fried chicken, pico de gallo, tacos, fried okra, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola. A simple choice, but one rich in symbolism. In his final moments, Leal gave his last words: "I've hurt so many people. Let this end. I take full responsibility. I'm sorry and I ask for forgiveness. I truly am sorry. Viva Mexico. Viva Mexico. I'm ready, Warden. Let's begin." A farewell to all, to the victim, to his loved ones, and to those who tried to prevent the irreversible. 8. Johnny Frank Garrett, Texas. On the early morning of October 31, 1981, Amarillo, Texas greeted Halloween with a chill in the air. But instead of children in costumes knocking on doors for candy, the residents near St. Francis Monastery were shocked by a tragic news. An elderly nun had been murdered inside the very place once known for its peacefulness. Johnny Frank Garrett, just 17 years old, lived right across from the monastery. He was accused of breaking in that morning. Investigators found evidence at the scene that matched Garrett, leading to his arrest on November 9th of that year. From start to finish, the case divided public opinion. Some believed Garrett was the perpetrator, while many others, including human rights activists, argued that he was a victim of pressure and legal mishandling. Garrett had a history of mental instability and grew up under difficult conditions, which some experts claimed hadn't been fully considered during the trial. On February 11, 1992, Johnny Frank Garrett was executed by lethal injection. He became one of the youngest inmates to be executed in modern Texas history. The final meal Garrett chose was a single item: ice cream. It wasn't a grand request, but rather a choice that evoked memories of a stolen childhood. Before the injection, Garrett left a message recorded by the media. "I want to thank my family for loving and caring for me. As for the rest of the world, they can keep their opinions to themselves." A final statement that didn't seek peace, but wasn't entirely angry either. Just the voice of a young person, lost in the middle of a never-ending debate. 9. James Emery Pastor, Texas. From October of 1980 to early 1981, a series of serious crimes in Texas shook the community. James Emery Pastor, along with two others, Stephen McCoy and Gary LeBlanc, was accused of being behind at least 3 deliberate murders. The first victim was Robert Edward Howard, a man targeted in a contract killing tied to a family dispute. The subsequent cases were identified as having mixed motives, from theft to organized violence. In all 3 cases, the damage done to the victims' families was immeasurable. Pastor, accused of either directly carrying out or playing a significant role in each crime, was eventually tried and sentenced to death. On September 20, 1989, after many years of imprisonment, the sentence was carried out. James Emery Pastor walked into the execution chamber without offering any statement. Silent, from start to finish. His last meal consisted of a steak, fresh salad, French fries, and a serving of watermelon. A simple meal, yet filled with the essence of the everyday, something he perhaps hadn't touched in a long time. No final words. No apology. No explanation. Just the steady hum of the air conditioner and his final empty gaze as time came to its end. 10. Stephen Albert McCoy, Texas. In the mid-1980s, amid a series of crimes that rocked Texas, the name Stephen Albert McCoy appeared alongside James Pastor and Gary LeBlanc, 3 companions in the chaotic days that led to irreversible consequences. In the case of Cynthia Darlene Johnson, investigators concluded that McCoy and his accomplices had planned to approach the young woman, then abduct and cause her death. It wasn't just a murder, but a wake-up call about the danger posed by individuals society thought it had under control. Stephen McCoy was sentenced to death. But his execution would become memorable, not because of the crime, but because of how the sentence was carried out. On May 24, 1989, McCoy was brought to the lethal injection room at Huntsville Prison. However, the process didn't go smoothly. When the drugs were administered, his body reacted strongly, with many witnesses considering it one of the most awkward executions of its time, even though officials stated that there was no technical error. The last meal McCoy requested was a simple one: a cheese sandwich, French fries, and a strawberry milkshake, like the meal many choose in their youth, before everything went off track. No final words. No farewell. No defense. McCoy left in silence, a heavy silence that wasn't easily forgotten. 11. Kenneth McDuff, Texas. On August 6, 1966, in Everman, Texas, a summer evening became the first crack in the violent life of Kenneth McDuff. He and Roy Dale Green were accused of kidnapping 3 teenagers. 2 of them would never return. The third, a girl, became the symbol of a shocking case at the time. McDuff was sentenced to death in 1968. But that verdict was overturned in 1972 after the U.S. Supreme Court suspended the death penalty nationwide, changing his sentence to life imprisonment. Many years later, in a controversial move, McDuff was granted parole and released. Sadly, instead of turning his life around, he returned to the darkness. From 1989 to 1992, investigators alleged that McDuff continued his crimes, targeting vulnerable women in various locations. The suspicions, the unsolved cases, and the social scars he left were nearly impossible to erase. In 1992, he was arrested again. And this time, Texas wasn't going to give him a second chance. On November 17, 1998, Kenneth McDuff was executed. His last meal, 2 well-done T-bone steaks, with all the side dishes available, a feast that many viewed as the last supper of his years of freedom. McDuff's last words were recorded briefly. "I'm ready to be released. Release me." A statement that left listeners puzzled. Was it freedom of the mind, or just a final plea for himself? McDuff left behind a lasting impression, not just because of his crimes, but because of the unanswered question: can the system ever predict what happens when forgiveness is granted? 12. Eliseo Moreno, Texas. On the morning of October 11, 1983, the western suburbs of Houston awoke to a chain of horrific events that lasted for hours. Eliseo Moreno, in an agitated and uncontrollable state, began a journey filled with blood and tragedy, leaving behind 6 victims at various locations. Among the victims were his wife and brother-in-law, those closest to him. He then went on to take the life of a highway patrol officer on duty, and 3 elderly strangers in Hempstead, victims who, by chance, became part of a series of uncontrollable actions. As the chaos didn't end, Moreno kidnapped a stranger's family, demanding they take him to Pasadena. It was a desperate journey for a man who could no longer escape the turmoil within his mind. He was arrested while traveling south with another hostage, stopped at a checkpoint in Wharton County. Texas was shaken, partly because of the number of victims, partly because of the incomprehensible nature of the acts, as if he were fleeing from himself, not the police. On March 4, 1987, Eliseo Moreno was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was a traditional Mexican dish: 4 cheesed enchiladas, 2 fish cakes, French fries with ketchup, a glass of milk, and a slice of lemon cake. As he entered the final room, Moreno said, "The Lord's word says the consequence of sin is death. I am ready to pay the price according to the law." A statement of acceptance, neither tragic nor evasive, as if he had known all along that everything would return to its origin: silence. 13. Stephen Peter Morin, Texas. If there were a map marking unsolved cases across the United States from the late 1960s to the early 1980s, the name Stephen Peter Morin would likely appear in most corners of that map. Morin wasn't just a criminal. He was a moving enigma, continuously moving between states: Nevada, Colorado, Texas. With multiple aliases and different identities, Morin was suspected of being involved in over 40 murders. Most of the victims were women and teenagers. But the exact number remains a question mark, as Morin left behind a network that was obscure, tangled, and filled with gaps in the investigative records. He was arrested in the early 1980s and sentenced to death in both Colorado and Texas. However, after abandoning his right to appeal, Morin was executed in Texas. On March 13, 1985, at Huntsville Prison, he was served a simple yet complete last meal: a T-bone steak, baked potatoes with butter, sweet green peas, a dinner roll, banana pudding, and a cup of coffee. Nothing more than a Sunday family dinner from a long-gone past. But what made Stephen Morin's execution memorable wasn't the meal. It was his final words: "Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time, for those who have walked with me, for the family and faith who have come to my side. Let your Holy Spirit pour over me, as I know your love has always surrounded me. Forgive them, for they know not what they do, as I know you have forgiven me, as I have forgiven them. I commend my soul to you. I praise you and thank you." It was no longer a deathbed confession. It was a ritual, an offering. No matter who Morin had been, what he had done, in that moment, he didn't speak of sin. He spoke of forgiveness. And then, the room returned to silence, where the end of a long journey finally arrived. 14. Eric Charles Nenno, Texas. On March 23, 1995, in Hockley, Texas, a small community was enveloped by a pain that couldn't be named. Nicole Benton, a 7-year-old girl, was last seen playing near her home. A few hours later, she disappeared without a trace. Eric Charles Nenno, a neighbor living nearby, initially wasn't a suspect. But the silence and conflicting details in his statement began to reveal a chilling truth. After hours of questioning, Nenno admitted to luring the girl into his house and committing the crime. The police later found her body hidden in the attic. Texas was in outrage. The case became a symbol of irreversible mistakes, and also a reminder of the fragility of safety, even in the quietest neighborhoods. Nenno was sentenced to death shortly after. During his time awaiting execution, he showed cooperation, with no appeals and no justifications. It was said that he spent his final years writing letters of apology to the victim's family, but nothing could truly make up for the loss. On October 28, 2008, Eric Nenno was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was simple: a grilled cheese sandwich, 4 fish cakes, 6 boiled eggs, and a cup of coffee. When asked if he had any final words, he simply replied, "No, Warden." No explanation. No last statement. Just silence, as if he understood that, at this point, every word had come too late. 15. Ronald Clark O'Brien, Texas. On Halloween of 1974, in Deer Park, a small town near Houston, people celebrated the holiday with the laughter of children and the colorful display of candy. But that night, an event would forever change the way people viewed this holiday, and the trust between parents and their children. Ronald Clark O'Brien, a father, is believed to have laced candy that his 8-year-old son, Timothy, brought home from the festival with poison. Timothy died just hours after eating a pixie sticks laced with cyanide. Police discovered that O'Brien didn't only give poisoned candy to his son, but also handed them out to other children to throw off suspicion. Luckily, no one else consumed the candy. The investigation quickly uncovered O'Brien's financial troubles and the fact that he had recently purchased life insurance policies for his children. Timothy's death, instead of being an accident, was determined to be a murder for profit. O'Brien was sentenced to death, and he became infamous, earning the nickname, the Candy Man. The case made parents across the United States more cautious about the candy their children received during future Halloweens. On March 31, 1984, Ronald Clark O'Brien was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was a full dinner: a T-bone steak cooked medium, French fries, corn, sweet peas, a salad, eggs, French dressing, crackers, Boston cream pie, rolls, and iced tea. Before he departed, he left a lengthy statement. As a justification for himself, what is about to happen in the next few minutes is wrong. But that does not mean that our entire justice system is wrong. I forgive all those who have participated in my death. I ask God's forgiveness, as I have forgiven those who have wronged me. I love all of you. A long, philosophical, and religious last statement, but not everyone believed it was an expression of remorse. For many, the pain that Timothy left behind remained. 16. James Edward Smith, Texas. On the afternoon of March 7, 1983, downtown Houston became chaotic when an armed robbery took place at the Union National Life Insurance Company office. James Edward Smith, in an attempt to carry out the heist, shot and killed 44-year-old area manager Larry Don Rovis. Smith was arrested shortly after. The victim's family described Larry as a gentleman, always prioritizing his work and family responsibilities. His sudden death left a great loss not only for his family but also for the community he lived in. During the trial, Smith claimed that he wasn't fully in control of his actions at the time of the crime. He frequently mentioned his spiritual beliefs and the influence of voodoo practices, an aspect that complicated the case in the eyes of the public. On June 26, 1990, James Edward Smith was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville Prison. What made him memorable was not just the crime, but his unusual last meal request: a handful of Riacunda soil, sacred earth used in voodoo rituals. The prison refused the request, as soil was not considered food, and Smith did not choose an alternative. When asked for his final words, he didn't give a long statement. The only words recorded were, "Hare Krishna," a religious chant, like a final prayer for his soul, not a justification, but perhaps a way to depart in peace, according to his own beliefs. 17. Carla Faye Tucker, Texas. On the night of June 13, 1983, in Houston, Texas, Carla Faye Tucker and her boyfriend Daniel Garrett broke into the apartment of Jerry Lynn Dean to rob him. But the situation escalated. Dean was murdered, and a woman named Deborah Thornton, who was present at the apartment at the time, also tragically lost her life. Tucker was arrested shortly thereafter. At the time of her trial, she was just 23, a woman with a troubled childhood, raised amid drugs, violence, and uncertainty. However, what divided public opinion was not the crime, but the transformation in Tucker's soul during her time on death row. In the years leading up to her execution, Carla Faye Tucker publicly renounced her past, embraced Christianity, and became a model of rehabilitation in prison. She received rare support from religious groups, human rights organizations, and even several politicians. Letters requesting clemency from the governor of Texas were written with both reason and tears. However, the death sentence was still carried out on February 3, 1998. She became the first woman to be executed in Texas in over 130 years. Her last meal was unusually simple: a banana, a peach, and a salad with ranch dressing. No frills. No special requests. It was as if she had let go of everything belonging to the old world. When asked if she had anything to say, Carla gently turned to the families of the victims and said, "Yes, sir, I would like to say to all of you, the Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that I am so sorry. I hope God will give you peace with this." An apology without justification. No blame. Just the remorse of a woman who did not deny her past, but spent the rest of her life asking for the opportunity to be forgiven. 18. James Autry, Texas. On the afternoon of April 20, 1980, the air in Port Arthur, Texas, seemed to stop after 3 gunshots. In a small convenience store, a life was taken over a 6-pack of beer. James Autry, 29 years old, entered the counter intending to steal the beer without paying. When the store clerk, Shirley Druitt, reminded him, he drew his gun and fired without hesitation. Shirley collapsed on the spot. But Autry's rage didn't end there. A few minutes later, he returned to the scene, this time not to escape, but to silence any remaining witnesses. Joseph Broussard, a former Catholic priest, and Athanasius Sfarnas, a Greek sailor, became the next targets. Broussard died instantly. Sfarnas survived but carried permanent brain damage, a living memory, smoldering and painful for the rest of his life. James Autry was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. Throughout the trial, he showed no remorse. For those who knew him, this was not surprising. But for the community, for the families of the victims, it was a deep wound in the trust of safety in a town that seemed so peaceful. On March 14, 1984, James Autry entered the execution chamber. As one of the first in Texas to be executed by lethal injection, a new method considered more humane, but for the victims, no method could erase the pain. His last meal: a hamburger, French fries, and a bottle of Dr. Pepper. A simple meal, as if trying to evoke something normal, when everything had already crossed the line. When asked for his final words, he did not answer. No apology. No justification. Just silence, heavy and absolute. In the end, stories of death row inmates in Texas are not just about death sentences, but serve as a reminder of the decisions and choices each person must face in life. Is justice truly served when death is the final outcome? Or is it just another part of the endless struggle between punishment and forgiveness? Each final meal and last words from these individuals not only reflect remorse but also raise profound questions about human nature, mistakes, and second chances. Perhaps these questions will make you reflect on what truly matters in life. If you found this video interesting and want to learn more about controversial stories, the lives of inmates, and dramatic situations, don't forget to hit subscribe and like to not miss the next videos. Share your thoughts in the comments, whether you empathize or have a different perspective on these stories. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos.